Tonight, did the King convince Donald Trump that the so-called special relationship is worth nurturing? After an elaborate welcome at the White House, King Charles reminded political leaders that the UK and US had one of the greatest alliances in human history.
Whatever our differences, whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy.
It's a precarious moment, a chance to repair an increasingly strained relationship 250 years after America declared independence, but one partially overshadowed by the Epstein scandal. Today, survivors of the billionaire paedophile again demanded a meeting with the monarch.
I am giving him the chance to stand up for all survivors and make history. What kind of king does he want to be remembered as?
Plus, the global oil crisis may be raising profits for some, but it's also fracturing the cartel that sets prices. More on that later in the program. And find out what happened when an Iranian spy network tried to recruit a Sky News producer. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. When King Charles stood up to address politicians in the US Congress, he himself admitted that he had the weight of history on his shoulders. This entire four-day trip has been constructed to help repair the so-called special relationship. Donald Trump loves British royalty. In fact, he jokingly suggested that his mum had a crush on the young Prince Charles. So as the King delivered his message to America, his aim was clear. He had to show that the UK and the US can overcome their differences and remind everyone that Britain would pull its weight on national defence. And there was another message, a subtle one, likely directed at survivors of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Coming up, we'll hear from an artist who staged a protest outside the White House today. But let's begin with this report from our US correspondent, Laura Bundock.
With full fanfare, a dazzling display and a star-spangled welcome, White House style. The scale of this military show, a first for a state visit, and a sign how much it means to him to host royalty. Two countries, two old allies, but a backdrop of tense transatlantic relations. And to that, many were against this whole trip. Here, though, with the ceremony, all that to one side. From Trump, a personal, warm greeting laying out his long-standing love for British royalty.
Anytime the Queen was involved in a ceremony or anything, my mother would be glued to the television and she'd say, "Look, Donald, look how beautiful that is." She really did love the family, but I also remember her saying very clearly, "Charles, look, young Charles, he's so cute."
And fulsome praise for the UK-US friendship.
The greatest of nations must be anchored by the strongest and deepest of roots. Americans have had no closer friends than the British. We speak the same language, we hold the same values, and together our warriors have defended the same extraordinary civilization under twin banners of red, white, and blue.
Inside the Oval Office, a meeting that mattered. What was discussed, we'll probably never know. No cameras allowed to capture the conversation. And then to Congress and the King's address.
Whatever our differences, whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy, to protect all our people from harm, and to salute the courage of those who daily risk their lives in the service of our countries.
A strong defence of the special relationship, an acknowledgement of current disputes, and a chance to strengthen ties that feel so frayed.
The United Kingdom recognises that the threats we face demand a transformation in British defence. That is why our country, in order to be fit for the future, has committed to the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War.
There was so much potential for jeopardy. Outside Congress, victims of paedophile Jeffrey Epstein gathered.
We're not going away. We're going to keep showing up, and we hope that you show up with us. He's certainly stood a lot stronger than our own president here of the United States. I do commend the king for that, but I also think this is a very missed opportunity, and I hope that he has the chance to acknowledge, hopefully the next time that he's available here, that we need to have a world leader step up in a way that we haven't seen from our own president here.
But the focus today, historic alliances over current political disputes, reminding the room and the president the UK and the US have an enduring relationship, and one that surpasses powerful personalities. Laura Bundock, Sky News in Washington.
And Laura joins us live from Washington, and with her is our US correspondent James Matthews covering events tonight. James, I'll come to you first because, of course, we know that British monarchs aren't meant to be overly political, but this very much felt like a very political speech from King Charles when he addressed the joint session of Congress.
Yeah, hi, Yalda. It did to me. If you were to drop a checklist of concerns about the governance of Donald Trump, then for me, the King ticked many of them, just in terms of the way Donald Trump operates and the controversies surrounding him. I mean, I thought it was certainly a well-received speech, rounds of applause more than 10 times, and, he was funny. There was warmth in the room. The King talking about how, I quoted Oscar Wilde saying, we have everything in common with the Americans except, of course, the language. Spoke about independence, 250 years old, or as we say in the UK, just the other day. So, he connected with his audience. But certainly on the politics, I'll go through some of the points. He spoke about the environment. He spoke about checks and balances, the importance of them. Remember, this is a US president who many criticize for governing by decree. The King spoke about Magna Carta, cited in Supreme Court cases, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances, emphasizing the importance of that. He spoke about the importance of not being inward-looking. Trump criticized for isolationist policy. The King said this, I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world, and that we ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking. He spoke about NATO. Remember, Donald Trump and members of the administration have rubbished NATO in recent months. The King reminded everybody that he served in the Royal Navy, as did his forebears, and he spoke about 9/11, said that NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time. We answered the call together, as our people have done through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, moments that have defined our shared security. So there was that, and there was more. Speaking about Europe, that growing distance between Europe and America politically, he addressed that, spoke about the alliance of our two nations being truly unique. Part of what Henry Kissinger described as Kennedy's soaring vision of a partnership based on twin pillars, Europe and America. That partnership, I believe, he said, is more important today than it has ever been. And he spoke about what I suppose was the central theme in terms of bringing the US and UK certainly closer together or resetting the relationship. Spoke about renewal and reconciliation. That was the underpinning theme, I thought, of the King, the ultimate ambassador, who was here on a mission, really, to get through the current acrimony and heal the current fractures in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the subtle and not so subtle messages. Laura, I'm going to bring you in because, of course, as James said there, he is the ultimate diplomat and representative. And, you know, I lost count of the number of standing ovations and rounds of applause, and they did find his speech very funny at times. And, of course, this is a speech that was written by the British government in collaboration with the King. Just talk us through that process.
Yeah, it's always interesting. There's a very civil servant phrase, who holds the pen? So they never say who holds the pen, who writes this speech. But we know that although it is the King's voice, very much using his tone and tenor to deliver the message, it is very much the government's message. So this speech, or he is there as head of state, he's not head of government. So it's a strange paradox always, his role as a constitutional monarch, that he's representing essentially the British people. And I think to that he clearly spoke about how he is bringing the friendship of the British people to the American people as well. So his role is an interesting one here, but I think this felt very much like a big speech. I was there in Germany, I was there in France when he addressed both parliaments there, and in Canada too last year. And these were big moments, you know, the post-Brexit, it was in the wake of comments about Canadian sovereignty and annexing Canada. But I think this trumped all of those. This was one of the most political speeches I've heard the King make, and it was a very, very significant speech for all the reasons I think James was listing there. Getting so close to the politics of everything, talking about NATO and that very personal connection of the King's to the Royal Navy. He's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, isn't he? And bringing in, you know, all the relatives, his ancestors who've served in the Navy, in light of Trump's comments about, you know, the toys of aircraft carriers that we have, the old broken down aircraft carriers. And I thought that was very interesting. All those standing ovations, and I was keeping a tally here, Yalda, 12 in total. There was one which got a half standing ovation, and that was when he was talking about the environment, you know, the disastrous melting of ice caps. He said the need to safeguard nature, and it was at that point, and it had to be explained to me, I didn't realise that it was the Republicans who stayed firmly sitting down, and it was the Democrats who rose to join that. I mean, you know, the drill baby drill kind of comments from Trump do not align with the King's views on climate change, and he's been such a long time campaigner on that. I was also just very briefly looking at the palace representatives who were sat down very close to where I was. They will have had a lot of say in this speech, and you could see the looks on their faces. They were as pleased as punch, I think, with how it was going. They were rising to their feet at the right moments. They were clapping. I think, you know, looking at the palace, the Foreign Office, Vet Cooper was there as well, the Foreign Secretary. They would have been very happy with how this landed. It went well. It was a room that reminded me that it's not just Donald Trump who has huge admiration for the royalty, but the King definitely captivated Congress today.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, a really well received speech. Let's just have a little bit more of a listen to the King's address, which is being viewed as a subtle reference to an issue overshadowing this trip as well. As we said, there were a lot of subtle messages in it, as well as the not so subtle ones. But just have a listen to this one.
In both of our countries, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both our societies today.
So James, you know, we've just been talking about understatement, but you know, he sort of weaves some of these issues within his speech, and I guess it's up to those listening to take away what they believe he was trying to say.
That's right, yeah, and one thing I think we are left to interpret, Yalda, is the business of the Epstein survivors. I was at a news conference earlier today in a building just over the road, and they held a press conference. They had asked for a meeting with King Charles, and that was declined by Buckingham Palace. They wanted to engage with him to some degree on a matter that he has an involvement, however tangential, with. Of course, his younger brother is very much in the frame. So they were disappointed that that meeting didn't take place. They reckoned it was a missed opportunity just to connect with them Buckingham Palace said there was a legal issue with it, that it could not happen because of ongoing police investigations, could impact on future legal action. The survivors, they counter that with, well, why not just have a meeting and just listen to us? So it didn't happen. I can tell you that Ro Khanna, the congressman who tried to arrange the meeting, I spoke to him earlier, and he reckoned that he'd been told by the UK ambassador here, Christian Turner, that there would be a reference to Epstein survivors in the speech. Now, there was a passage, I'll read it. In both of our countries, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse, and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both of our societies today. So there you go, take from that what you will. I think if that's a reference to Epstein survivors, it is oblique, certainly, to say the least. But that's what he said, and that could be interpreted in a number of ways, I suppose. But interestingly, Christian Turner, who said to Ro Khanna there would be a reference, in the midst of some controversy he is today because recorded remarks have been published by the FT. He was speaking to some students a few weeks ago, talking about how, well, dismissing the notion of a special relationship between the UK and US, saying that if a special relationship existed with Washington, that was with Israel.
Yeah, and we are going to discuss Christian Turner a little later in the programme. He certainly hasn't had a very good day, but thank you so much for bringing us up to date, James and Laura. So, as you heard there from James, survivors of sexual abuse by Jeffrey Epstein held events in Washington today to coincide with the King's visit. They called for further legislation to protect victims of sex trafficking and a deeper acknowledgement from those in power. One of the women there was Rena O. She staged a mock tea party for the King, complete with an empty chair. I spoke to her earlier. She described her first encounter with the late sex offender when she was 21. Just have a listen.
I was a young art student when I met Jeffrey Epstein, and when I met him, he presented himself as this amazing philanthropist who funded a lot of young students' education. And immediately after my first meeting with him, he offered me a scholarship to pay for my art education. At the time, I did not have my permanent residency, so I was very vulnerable, and systemically, I could not attend the art school of my choice or really go to college. So I accepted his offer. However, he used that and lured me in to exploit me for years. And when I refused to comply with his demands, he eventually withdrew the scholarship, but that happened very quickly.
Rena, you staged a protest outside the White House, which coincided with the visit of the King and Queen. Just talk us through that and what actually happened.
I, organized this protest as a mock tea party, and I reserved a seat for King Charles to come out and, spend some time with me and fellow survivors, listen to us, hear our stories, and give him an opportunity to come forward. However, he didn't show up, but I am going to be persistent. I think, unfortunately for all of us who were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein, we never received our justice because he was never convicted in 2019, and then he's no longer here. So we feel that we didn't get that closure.
And of course, there is speculation about what will be in that speech, but do you expect him to mention the Epstein victims?
Right now, I do not know exactly what to expect. However, I would like for him to mention the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and, tell our U.S. government that he supports the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And this is something that he has, said before when he released his previous statements. That would be so meaningful for survivors like myself to have the King of England tell our US government that he stands with us survivors. And that, will absolutely change the narrative, change the way our government is treating us right now, which is really unfair. And those people need to be held accountable, the ones that are named in the files and the ones whose names that remain, redacted. We need to know who they are. If he can put some pressure, to the US government officials and encourage them to, join the survivors and support our cause and deliver justice, it would be so meaningful.
Yeah, Rena, Buckingham Palace, before the King and Queen made their way to the United States, said that the reason that they couldn't meet with the Epstein victims is because there's an ongoing UK police investigation. Just your response to that?
My response to that is, he can break away from royal protocol. We've heard these statements from the royal, family, from Buckingham Palace over and over again. I am giving him the chance to stand up for all survivors, despite, that release statement, and make history. What kind of king does he want to be remembered as? Someone who stood with survivors, who was on the right side of history, or someone who, just protected these people that need to be held accountable, despite the fact that, the former prince and Peter Mandelson are named in the files. That should not, be a priority. It shouldn't be prioritized. No, I disagree with what they're saying.
And Rena, as I said, you staged this demonstration today at the White House, outside the White House. What message were you hoping to send through that?
I am extending an invitation to King Charles. King Charles, I would love to sit down with you and tell you the story of what happened to me. I want to have a private meeting with you at some point in the future if I don't get to see you here in Washington with fellow survivors. We want to be heard, listened to, and want to meet with you in person. And it would just mean so much just to receive that type of support and acknowledgement, and that hearing the words that you understand and stand with us, but seeing you in person would have such a huge impact in our recovery, because I am living through this nightmare every single day of my life, and I just want to heal.
Rena, I just wonder, we've seen so many sort of files come out around the Epstein files, so many documents. Is there any sense of healing or justice for you or your fellow victims who have been through this nightmare?
When we see those people that were involved and enabled Jeffrey Epstein, when we see that they are being held accountable, I will start seeing justice. But right now, in this climate and everything that's happening within the U.S. government, it's not happening soon enough, and there's no accountability here. And yeah, I just feel that the healing aspect, everyone is on their personal journey. Ultimately, it's where you are in that process. But to have closure, we really need to have accountability. And, he is here and he can make history while he is here and stand with us survivors.
That's Rena O, an Epstein survivor there. Now, to leaked comments made by the recently appointed UK ambassador to the US, disparaging and questioning the special relationship. So Christian Turner, who replaced Peter Mandelson, made the remarks to British students visiting the US 2 months ago. The Financial Times obtained a recording. In it, Ambassador Turner describes the special relationship as quite backwards looking, with lots of baggage. Just have a listen.
Special relationship is a phrase I try not to utter, because it's quite nostalgic, it's quite backwards looking, and it has a lot of sort of baggage about it. I think there is probably one country that has a special relationship with the United States, and that is probably Israel.
Well, a Foreign Office spokesperson said this in response. These were private, informal comments made to a group of UK sixth form students visiting the US in early February. They're certainly not any reflection of the UK government's position. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is at the White House. And Mark, you know, we've been speaking a lot about what a good day the King is having, and Donald Trump was on message as well. Someone who isn't having a good day is Christian Turner.
These are awkward comments, that there's no question about it. And it's not just what he said about the special relationship. In fact, I think that is perhaps the least controversial thing that he has said. These are comments, as you say, that were leaked to the Financial Times, made a few months ago, just after he took office, in fact. The stuff about the special relationship is not totally surprising. I mean, when the special relationship is rocky, you do find that British officials kind of play it down and sort of call it cliched and talk about the fact that it comes across as a bit needy and all that sort of stuff. So I don't think that's particularly surprising. It's what he said about Epstein, actually, that I think is very interesting, where he said that he was very surprised, extraordinary, that no one in the United States had faced any backlash for their association with Epstein. He said, I find it extraordinary that the scandal hasn't touched anybody in the United States. Now, remember the historic association that the president has with Jeffrey Epstein. So those comments are really quite awkward. And then also, in a British political context, he talked about Keir Starmer being in quite a lot of trouble. Remember, this is back in February. He talked about the May elections being a crucial point. He said that Keir Starmer, his boss, was stubborn. So kind of very awkward for that to come out on a day like today. Look, I think we need to, in terms of the US aspect of it, let's see whether President Trump picks up on this, whether he posts on Truth Social about it. If he does, well, then it could become a bigger problem for Christian Turner. But the wider context, I mean, you read out the statement from the Foreign Office, but the wider context is it is the case that this so far has been an exceptionally good and successful state visit. Both sides are very happy with it.
Yeah, Mark, and we're just talking about the number of standing ovations there as the King addressed Congress. I mean, overall, as you say, it has appeared so far, I mean, it's day 2 of 4, an incredibly successful trip where everyone has more or less stayed on message.
Yeah, and so carefully stage managed as well. You know, we've had absolutely no opportunity to get anywhere near King Charles or the president. Now, contrast that with pretty much every other world leader, where at the last minute, the president just decides how this is going to work. You know, closed press moments, that's moments where we're not allowed any access, are suddenly at the last minute opened up. And so we all barrel into the Oval Office and ask questions. That didn't happen this time. Yes, there was an Oval Office moment, but there were only still photographs of it and no media present. So any opportunity to either ask the King about why he is not meeting Epstein survivors, or indeed to ask the president about why he thinks it's appropriate to slam the British government, but then fawn at the president, at the King. No opportunity to do any of that. So we're being kept very much at arm's length for now. New York tomorrow, maybe that'll be different. Virginia on Thursday, maybe that will be different as well. But for the moment, very stage managed, very successful as well.
Mark, as always, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. And we've got some breaking news. An arrest warrant has been requested by the US Attorney's Office in Eastern NC and issued by the court for former FBI Director James Comey. The former FBI Director James Comey, as I said, has been indicted again, this time over a social media photo of seashells arranged on a beach that officially say constituted a threat against President Donald Trump. So that's some breaking news there. Former FBI Director James Comey indicted again. Now, Philip Rieker is an American diplomat who formerly served as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Interim Ambassador to the UK. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. There's so much going on. On the one hand, you know, an incredibly successful trip so far by the King, everyone staying on point, on message. Donald Trump, you know, even though he's been often described as unpredictable, sticking very much to his speech and his side of the bargain. Just your key takeaways so far.
Yalda, thanks for having me, and I am delighted to see the King and Queen here in Washington. It was well timed, of course. It was long planned to celebrate, to mark the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, and the King has certainly leaned into that theme as was appropriate. I thought his speech before Congress was marvelous and something that the American people needed too. His reminders of the sort of historical context of not only his visit, but our relationship with the United Kingdom and what America stands for. In my time in the UK, leading our embassy there, I had the opportunity to meet the King, who was then, of course, Prince of Wales, on several occasions. And we did speak about his interests, his knowledge about the United States, our system, the tripartite form of government, the checks and balances that he referenced in his speech. And those are issues that I think are sometimes forgotten or have become a little shaky as we get through this first quarter millennium of our republic. So welcome his visit, and I think it's gone remarkably well.
Yeah, in many ways, it felt like it was reminding Americans about their democracy and also, I guess, telling the world about how he views America, and in many ways weaving in that relationship with the UK by referencing 9/11, for example, you know, and the fact that the UK, the world, stood with the United States, you know, in that crucial time, just referencing key historical moments that brought the two nations together.
It's a great reminder, and of course he'll commemorate 9/11 by visiting Ground Zero in New York. I will recall that probably the most moving moment of my time leading the mission in the UK was when Her Majesty the Queen issued me, that is the late Queen, of course, issued a request for my presence at Windsor Castle for the changing of the guard and the playing of the Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem, on the anniversary of 9/11, the 20th anniversary in 2021. And I have to say it was probably one of the most moving moments of my life, certainly my professional life, to represent the United States in that moment and to have Her Majesty, on behalf of the United Kingdom, make that gesture to us. It's a sign of the friendship. It's a sign of what is so deep in this relationship. And really, as the King pointed out in his speech before Congress, unique in history.
Do you agree with these private remarks that the UK ambassador to the US made, which have been revealed now, that actually this idea of the special relationship is, you know, outdated and frankly it should be revisited? It feels a little bit desperate and needy, is how it's sometimes described.
Well, when I was in the UK, I was often asked by many Brits, not necessarily government people, say, you know, don't use this term "special relationship." It's outdated. It makes us feel small. I think it's a great phrase, but I understand the context, perhaps, in which Sir Christian was saying that. I wasn't there. Obviously, I haven't heard the full context. I think the King, again, said it best. He didn't use the term special relationship in his remarks, but he referred to our partnership born out of dispute, but no less strong for it. And just the breadth of this, the historic context of this, I think is remarkable. He referred to his grandfather having been the first monarch, the first king to visit, along with the late Queen Mother, to the United States on the eve of World War II, where that special relationship, in a sense, was born because it was just after the end of the war that Winston Churchill coined that phrase. So I know that the UK has a wonderful representation here. Christian Turner is an absolutely terrific career diplomat. He and his team, his deputy, James Roscoe, who was acting as the chargé d'affaires for a time, also just terrific. The whole team is terrific, and you could see that yesterday when the embassy hosted their majesties along with all of these guests for a wonderful garden party with absolutely beautiful sunny skies here in Washington.
You were there.
I was there, and it was a great and moving moment just to hear those anthems both played again with the King and Queen present, and to enjoy, of course, a little Pimm's, maybe a little bubbly, and some quintessential British tea sandwiches on the lawn at the beautiful UK embassy residence. So again, we're celebrating a far bigger picture, and the King was great in capturing that in his remarks. I think this will again be a historic day, and shows why having a head of state, and particularly someone with King Charles' breadth of history, the years he's been a part of it, he can really do this. And of course, doing this on behalf of the government in a sense, but he is the sovereign, representing the crown, the head of state. And I think for many of us, so much more than that.
Philip Reuter, really great to talk to you. We will, of course, speak to you again a little later in the programme. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us so far. Well, let's bring in the Democratic US political strategist, Hillary Rosen, who joins me here. Hillary, good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Together yesterday.
That was quite a rosy scenario in that conversation just now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Given we just spoke about Christian Turner and some of the things that he said, it's interesting, isn't it? Because everyone looks at it, the relationship from their own perspective. Christian Turner is going there off the back of Mandelson and looking at things from a completely different perspective at a moment where the Prime Minister is being heavily criticised by Donald Trump. And Philip Reuter is looking at it from a completely different perspective a few years ago when he was, part of the conversation around the special relationship. But I guess putting all of that into context, do you want to just sum up your takeaways from today's visit, the sort of speech that the King gave?
I thought that the King's speech was really thoughtful and very political, much more so than I think maybe people expected. He talked about Congress being, responsibility being of the people and not for the power of one, potentially a slight dig at both a monarch and a president who was overstepping. So there were many places, I thought, where he gave some subtle hints about, what he might have thought. But ultimately, he was the perfect diplomat today. I can't say the same for his, for the state's ambassador, which the staff of the British Embassy performed brilliantly over the last couple of days, and we will see this over the next couple of days. I have friends in the embassy there. But, then the ambassador goes and steps on it with news that he made in front of a group of sixth graders. Not quite very diplomatic.
Yeah, they're saying it's private, informal. But as you say...
The other thing it was, though, I think, and is not really being said, it's a little bit of a dig at, it's a dig at the U.S. and Israel. It's a dig at Israel, obviously. But what we know from recent polling is that the opinion of the British people has really, about America, has fallen dramatically. I just saw a YouGov poll today where 34% of Brits approve of America today and over 60% disapprove. And I think that is this sort of little subtle dig about, you talk nastily about us. You're supporting Israel when you should be doing more on other things. You are not really taking on Russia for, our challenge in Ukraine. There is this kind of frustration among the British people. And I think that what the King did today was he didn't share that frustration, but I thought he elevated the common values and the goals.
And elevated the conversation around this, and sent those subtle and not so subtle messages, whether it was to Donald Trump about the nature and importance of the relationship. We've talked about 9/11. Yeah. You and I were talking earlier where you said whoever came up with that, using 9/11 as
a former political staffer, I will say, a genius move when President Trump is criticizing the UK government for not being a good enough military ally to send the King to 9/11 to remind the world and America when the UK stood militarily with America. That's we'll see that tomorrow. That's a strategic call on the King's part.
Especially when, in this moment, Donald Trump has been incredibly critical, saying, where were you when we needed you? This has become caused the rupture between him and, the Prime Minister, where he's saying, well, we want you to help us here with the Iran war. And the Prime Minister is saying, despite the pressure, we're just not going to, it's not in our interest.
And President Trump's supporters are mostly going along with this in terms of the criticism of European allies and the UK. The entire Republican Congress that the King stood before today has given Donald Trump a blank check rhetorically and financially for this conflict in Iran. So there isn't really a challenge to President Trump around this right now, and maybe some of this creates a little bit. But we sure won't see that challenge reflected in any comments that President Trump will make about the King. He was thrilled with today. He loved having that.
And you said yesterday that Donald Trump was going to be the charming Donald Trump, that version that we know when he has a guest that he admires and looks up to and how he behaves. And, it's not often that, you look at a speech that Donald Trump is making and he doesn't go off script.
With a little dig at something.
Absolutely, or just on some kind of tangent. This was not going to happen. He knew what he had to do.
I said that last night. People who were expecting a tense meeting, difficult conversations, coming out of it with the president saying, I disagree with the King on something. They don't know Donald Trump. He was not going to do that. He was, reveling in being connected to the royal family today.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep you there, Hillary, because, of course, we will come back to you more on the US royal visit shortly. But first, BP's profits have more than doubled in the first 3 months of this year in the energy giant's first results since the start of the Iran war. Just take a look at this chart from our business team. The red bar shows how BP earnings surged by 130% to $3.2 billion, or just under £2.5 billion. Oil prices have raced higher since the US-Israeli war on Iran started in late February and are now up more than 60% so far this year. Energy campaigners accuse BP of profiting at the expense of households. The company insists it's making sure fuel supply needs are met across the UK. And there was another big moment today in geopolitics and economics, with the UAE quitting the so-called oil cartels, OPEC and OPEC+. The Emiratis announced it as they and other Gulf allies met in Saudi Arabia. They say it'll give them greater flexibility after expressing frustration with production restrictions as relations with the Saudis have turned frosty. And as the war continues to impact the global economy, here Sky News has been investigating apparent attempts via social media to recruit small-time criminals for spying and hits against Jewish targets in the UK. And we saw for ourselves how Iran looks to be seeking out those who are willing to sow chaos. Here's our home editor, Jason Farrell.
This channel on the chat platform Telegram looks like a normal social media feed, but it's actually a funnel, drawing people in to acts of violence and espionage.
In recent weeks, we've seen crude attacks on Jewish targets in the UK and suggestions from authorities that some perpetrators might have been recruited by Iran on Telegram. So we're going to go down this recruitment funnel, examining what we find with the help of a former intelligence officer and former security advisor to the British government.
So they're using this as a filter, right? So people who want to consume a certain kind of message about the war in Iran will subscribe to this, and they'll self-select. So this is the first cut.
Then comes the interactive element, a link offering you the chance to cooperate with Iran's intelligence services. There's a series of pages that offer reassurances about the cause, Palestinians being a key one, and that the Iranian intelligence services will look after you.
We're seeing monitoring and support, suggesting that if you get in trouble, then the long arm of the Iranian intelligence service will be able to reach out and give you support, which I think is very interesting.
My producer Nick has already entered an ID a few weeks ago, and the conversation that follows takes place over a number of days. It shows us what they want and how they try to hook Nick in.
Tell me your name, city you're from, what access you have, what skills you possess.
The next question, do you know anyone in the military or security services? So that's going to tick a box on somebody's form.
And it is not unreasonable to ask whether at this point you're even talking to a human or whether this is the equivalent of a customer service bot.
They immediately want to know if Nick has access. Nick asks what they mean. It's spelled out. Do you know anyone in the military or security services in your country who you can get information from? These days there's a lot of movement of Americans to British bases. It's a frank request for Nick to involve himself in espionage.
And scanning the QR code on your screen will take you to the full extended version of Jason's report. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, we'll get some final thoughts from our guests on the King's address to Congress in Washington.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok.
These slums, once gripped by fear and death.
There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police will give me the orders, and after I kill the target, I throw the gun away.
We try our best to uncover and unpick a fast-changing and deeply complex region.
These large waterways provided an excellent source of body disposal.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped.
Sheikh Hasina, how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that.
We're going to take you to the very heart of a criminal network, going undercover inside Southeast Asia's scam centres for the very first time.
We won't have any problems with police, it's okay. Just seen Imran Khan leave, and as we understand it, he's just been shot in the leg.
They have decided that the only way they'll allow elections is if I am inside jail or killed.
Sky News get the full story first.
Chinese vessels start encircling the boat we're on, blocking its path.
The Chinese are now deploying water cannons, firing it directly towards our boat. We've discovered doctors across Delhi dishing out pills like this, claiming they will provide a lifelong cure for homosexuality.
Rohingya people fleeing an escalating civil war.
The situation here in Cox's is desperate. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim. Back to our main story of the day, the King's state visit to the US. And Philip Rieker is an American diplomat who formerly served as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Interim Ambassador to the UK. Thank you so much for joining us again on the programme. You know, this is going to be a trip that lasts 4 days, but so far, so good. The King's, visit to Washington wraps up here, and his time with Donald Trump wraps up here as he sort of looks towards New York and Virginia next. But, you know, many would say that this moment has been quite successful.
I do think, Yalda, that the speech before the joint session of Congress, both the House of Representatives and all the senators, as well as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the justices of the Supreme Court, that really, I think, reached out to the American people more broadly in the context of our 250th anniversary of independence. But in the context of the current times, I think the King's messages were extremely gracious, first of all, historically accurate. He focused on facts and contexts, and I think that will be welcomed. They were very positive and upbeat messages, even during difficult times. And he reminded us of how important it is to have friends in the world of international affairs, but also spoke at a common level that all Americans can understand and that will resonate, I think.
Yeah, far more political than many had anticipated. You know, British monarchs aren't typically political, but perhaps the King felt in this moment it was important that he leans in on that.
No, I think you're right. I mean, leaning in is part of our times, isn't it? Had he not addressed certain subjects, I think that would have been a topic of discussion. And I think he did it. He threaded the needle. He walked the fine line, which I believe King Charles is particularly well suited to do. He knows his history. He's had, his entire lifetime really to prepare for moments like this. He is, as one of your earlier guests said, the ultimate diplomat. He is represents the United Kingdom, but also a number of other countries. And his timing here was, I think, very well done. And he did address some of the issues of the day, but without getting political, without taking sides per se. He just gave a little more food for thought. And sometimes I think that's useful to sit back and think about what he said. So I hope people will listen to the speech over and over again, will read it and take some of it to heart.
Yeah, and reflect. Philip Rieker, thank you so much for joining us this evening on the programme.
It's a pleasure, Yalda. Thanks.
Well, let's bring in Hilary Rosen. And Hilary, it is, when we sum up his time in Washington, this was his big moment. He wasn't going to let this moment sort of pass, because when you think about something like this, everything from the gifts they give to what they wear is sending a message, certainly what they say.
Right. And the royals are particularly good at those sort of symbolic moments. I was struck when he said, I'm the 19th sovereign who wakes up and thinks about America each day and what's happening in America. And I can tell you, Americans are so parochial that most Americans don't think about what's happening in the UK. And, since I've moved here to London, I realize how global people in the UK are and how parochial Americans are about what's happening. And so if the King's visit sort of opens people's eyes to the history of our country and the history of the relationship, that's all a plus. And if it gets Donald Trump to behave for a couple of days, that's even better.
And of course, we've been talking about the ties between the two nations, but the King himself has a son. No one's really talked about Prince Harry and the fact that he lives in the United States.
It's striking, isn't it?
It is.
Imagine parents going to a country where your children live and nobody mentions it. Nobody talks about it. Oh, you're going to see your kid? No. So I think that is it must be personally awkward. It has to be, and I feel for the King on that point. But certain issues were off topic, off limits for both Donald Trump and the King. Jeffrey Epstein was off limits. Probably Prince Harry's off limits. And that's kind of the nature of diplomacy, isn't it? You sort of find the common ground.
Yeah, and I guess Philip Rieker sort of talked about the fact that, the King knows how to walk that fine line, to touch all the key points. His speech at moments, very funny. And he managed to capture that and send very clear messages, both to those listening in Congress, but also to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think you raised an interesting point. One of the values of this, in many respects, is there's some faith in world leaders getting along well. And they're both very funny and very warm, and seeing that play out on an international stage, maybe that has some lasting impact.
I was going to ask you about the kind of wider global implications in this moment where people feel like, what is the world order? When we talk about the international community, what does that really mean in the midst of this Iran war? And Donald Trump and his unpredictability as a leader. I mean, how would you sum all of that up in this moment? And I have about a minute left. I'm sorry, Hillary.
Yeah, I would just say that I think this doesn't change that Donald Trump really sees himself as the ruler of the world these days. He sees himself as being in charge of many decisions where he was not given, the portfolio for, but yet he inserts himself. And I think that the one kind of place he steps back and takes pause is, well, a monarchy has more lasting impact. So, but I don't think this changes much in terms of the long term for President Trump.
Hillary, always grateful to have your thoughts and analysis. Thank you so much for joining us. And that's it from me and the World team tonight. We're back tomorrow from 9 p.m. More coverage of the US royal visit next with Anna Botting and The Wrap. Good night.